Good morning, Lieutenant Tully.
Good morning.
I'm not going to go in any particular order, so forgive me if I bounce around just a little bit. You indicated that on direct examination this morning that you didn't seek a search warrant for 34 Fairview, the interior of 34 Fairview, correct?
Yes.
To your knowledge, nobody under your supervision sought such a search warrant either, correct?
Correct.
You explained that in your mind there was no probable cause to seek a search warrant for the interior of the home, is that right?
Yes.
But you also admitted that you didn't seek consent, for which you don't have to have probable cause if you get consent, correct?
Correct.
You could ask me right now, hey, Alan, can I look at your cell phone? If I say sure, you do your thing, right?
I could.
But for a court to order that I hand over my cell phone, you got to get a search warrant, sign an affidavit, and get a court to agree with it, correct?
Yes.
You've applied for myriad search warrants in your career, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Very experienced, correct?
Supposedly.
I expect that there have been circumstances, Lieutenant Tulley, in which you sought a search warrant and the judge says, no, I don't think there's enough here, correct?
Yes.
You don't get in trouble for that, correct?
With whom? No.
With the court.
No.
It's not illegal.
It's not illegal.
You don't get sanctioned for it. You don't get your pay docked because you don't get a search warrant based on an affidavit, correct?
Correct.
So there's no real sanction in seeking it if you in good faith believe that there's a reason to seek it, correct?
Outside of the time that it takes to author it and put it together and go to the court, yes, there's no sanction.
Of course. But in a homicide investigation, you're not going to fail to do certain investigative tasks because it takes time. You're going to do what is necessary for the investigation, correct?
Yes.
Of course. You indicated that you did not believe that there was information sufficient that y'all had at the very initial stages of the investigation to seek a search warrant or to ask for consent, correct?
Yes.
But you did know the following. In the initial moment, you were aware that John O'Keefe had been invited to a party inside a home. You knew that home was located at 34 Fairview.
Yes.
You also knew that John O'Keefe arrived at 34 Fairview, correct?
We believe so, yes.
You also knew at the time that he had been, for want of a better phrase, partying with the individuals who were inside the home, correct? Expected to meet at the house.
They were at a bar previous to that, yes.
You're aware that a drinking glass was found in the yard attendant to or close to, adjacent to where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found.
Yes.
That drinking glass had been broken, correct?
Yes.
You're aware that drinking glasses are commonly found inside homes, right?
As well as bars.
As well as bars, right? But at that point, you didn't know. It's just a broken glass, correct?
It's a broken glass, correct.
You also know that he was found without a coat on.
Yes.
Are coats normally worn outside or inside?
It's user's choice.
Fair enough. 18 degrees, you would expect that if someone was outside, they'd have a coat on, correct?
I'm the kind of person that wears shorts throughout the year. I'll often go without a jacket.
All right. A true Bostonian.
Yes, sir.
He didn't have any coat, gloves, scarf, nothing like that.
Correct.
He had no winter gear on whatsoever, correct?
Correct.
Under ordinary circumstances, and you may be the exception, but under ordinary circumstances, if someone was out in 18-degree weather, you might expect that they would have some winter garb on, correct?
Objection.
And you certainly would expect that if someone took their coat, their glove, their hat, their winter gear off, they might leave it inside the house, right? Rather than outside the house.
Objection.
I'll let you answer that, Detective Lieutenant.
It's probably predicated on where you take it off,
Right.
your relationship to the location.
Right. Reasonable assumption might be the winter gear might be inside the house.
Objection.
Is that a reasonable assumption, Detective Lieutenant?
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
It's not reasonable that he would have his jacket inside the house? You wouldn't just assume that?
Well, using the term "the house," you talking about any house? 34 Fairview?
Correct.
No, it's not reasonable.
All right. You didn't think it was reasonable at the time
Still don't.
to even ask, could he have had a jacket off inside the house? I'm talking about at the time, the initial stages of the investigation.
Who am I asking this question to?
I'm asking if you believed it was reasonable if a man is found 30 feet outside the front door of a home and he's got no winter gear on whatsoever, that perhaps he came from inside the home not having donned his winter gear.
Objection.
Can you answer that, Detective Lieutenant?
It's not reasonable, given other information I had.
You also know that he didn't have a shoe on, correct?
Yes.
Where might you look for the shoe if you didn't find it out by his body initially?
The question's not accurate to the facts we had at the time.
The facts you had at the initial stages, I'm talking about just after 6:37, 7:30 in the morning, when the investigation was beginning. During those times, you didn't have any information about where the other shoe was, except he just didn't have a shoe on at the hospital, correct?
We didn't know there was a shoe not accounted for until after noontime.
So when you did find out that there was a shoe unaccounted for, one place to look might be outside, correct?
Yes.
Another place to look might be inside the home, correct?
We looked at the former and we located it there.
You also are aware that a body is being dragged by the shoulders, could easily lose a shoe.
Objection.
Sustained.
Have you ever experienced a homicide in which a body is dragged and you're aware of a shoe being pulled off while the body's being dragged?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
I don't have experience with that.
Certainly not outside the realm of possibility as a professional investigator.
It's possible.
You were also aware that, at least initially, it appeared from accounts that John O'Keefe may have been involved in a physical altercation, correct?
Possible.
As a matter of fact, that was reported by one of your subordinates, Yuri, Bukhenik, to the medical examiner's office, right?
As a possibility, yes.
As a possibility. You're aware that your other subordinate, Trooper Proctor, according to certain information he had gotten from first responders, also believed that a physical altercation was possible, sorry, as well.
It was possible, yes.
Okay. You also knew that the house would be a normal location to have other individuals who might have been involved in that physical altercation.
Objection.
Can you answer that, Detective Lieutenant?
An altercation could take place anywhere.
Exactly.
People can often travel from the location of the altercation miles away to another location.
Or they could travel 30 feet outside as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay. In the early morning hours of, let's say, the hours following your Massachusetts State Police initiation or engagement in this investigation, you became aware of Brian Higgins, correct?
Yes.
That name was bantied about as a potential witness in the investigation, correct?
Yes.
You're aware that Brian Higgins indicated that he saw a tall, dark-haired man enter the home after he arrived, correct?
I'm not aware of that.
The reason you're not aware of it, Lieutenant Tully, is because nobody bothered to interview Brian Higgins February 10th, right?
Objection.
So in that form, then it's sustained. Ask it differently, Mr.
When was
Jackson.
Brian Higgins first interviewed?
February,
7th, 10th?
To-
Yeah, in February, not January 29th, certainly.
correct.
Although he was known to be inside the house, correct?
Yes.
So had you known that, had you had the information, for instance, that Brian Higgins admitted to having seen a tall, dark-haired man walk in the house, that might have changed the complexion of your investigation at that time.
Objection.
Can you answer that, Detective Lieutenant?
In the off chance that Mr. Higgins presumably had said something like that, I would certainly need more information describing this person. I would ask a series of questions to narrow it down to make sure that this person was John O'Keefe.
Right, exactly. That would just be a normal part of the investigation. You just take evidence A and link it to evidence B to evidence C. That would be the normal way to do an investigation.
We would normally follow the evidence, correct?
But in point of fact, nobody did seek a warrant to go inside the house, correct?
Correct.
Nobody did seek to have a forensic team go inside the house and look.
Correct.
Nobody asked for consent.
Correct.
I want to ask you about the Sallyport video, if I could. Did you obtain a copy of any video surveillance footage from Canton Police Department?
Yes.
Okay. If you can, tell me which footage you obtained and where. There's several videos, Lieutenant, and it can be confusing. So if you could be as detailed as possible, explain what footage you gathered and when you gathered it.
Most recently, and the date escapes me, but it's within the last couple of months, I had contacted Chief Helena Rafferty of the Canton Police Department and asked her to burn another copy or create another copy of the Sallyport video during a certain time period on January 29th to ensure that the video that we had received previously was all of the records responsive to that request.
You found out that the video that you received earlier was not, in fact, completely responsive because there was a video left out, right?
I didn't do a one-to-one comparison, I just had made the request.
Ultimately, you did receive a video of the interior of the Sallyport, correct?
Yes.
And can you tell me, did you look at that? Did you review that video?
Quickly, not the whole thing.
Okay. Was there anything of note about that interior video? By the way, let me ask you another question, Lieutenant Tully, just to clarify. There's a very grainy, dark, almost black of the interior, correct? You've seen that one?
Yes.
Or excerpts of it?
Yes.
That video is missing some pretty significant time frames throughout the video?
I didn't review the whole thing, but I'm aware of that video existing.
Fair enough. Then there's another video that's pretty clear, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm asking you about the clear video. Did you make any note about anything unusual about that video?
No. But again, I didn't really review it.
You didn't review it with any detail?
Correct.
Did you make a note that video was inverted?
I did not.
Did you make a note about the timestamp on the video either being correct and properly positioned or inverted?
No.
Did you give that video to Trooper Proctor?
I believe I gave it to Sergeant Bukhenik.
Sergeant Bukhenik? And what did Sergeant Bukhenik do with it?
Reviewed it?
Okay. Is that somehow uploaded onto the Massachusetts State Police computer system somehow for safekeeping?
No, we'll hold it within the DA's office on that server. It's not touching the MSP.
Okay, so it is uploaded on some sort of server.
We will memorialize it somewhere, yes.
Did Chief Rafferty give it to you on a thumb drive or a disk, or how was it physically provided?
I don't know. I didn't receive it. She dropped it off at the office. I remember a thumb drive.
You remember a thumb drive. All right. Then it's uploaded onto the system, and the case officer would have access to that system.
Yes.
Okay. In this case, that would be Trooper Proctor.
Yes.
Did you notify Trooper Proctor, when I say immediately, reasonably quickly, after you got notice that the video had been dropped off by Chief Rafferty?
I informed Sergeant Bukhenik.
Okay. And do you know, as you sit here, you may not, as you sit here, do you know if Sergeant Bukhenik reasonably quickly informed Trooper Proctor that video existed?
I don't know when or where that notification was made.
As you sit here now, you are aware that Trooper Proctor is aware of that video and had access to it?
Yes.
Okay. Yesterday, there was some testimony about taillight pieces that were found at the location, correct?
Yes.
With the court's permission, I've asked for the evidence bags that were entered into evidence yesterday.
Okay, may take a minute.
Before I get to the evidence bags, Lieutenant Tully, one more, or maybe a couple more questions about the Sally Port video. You indicated that you received additional video from Chief Rafferty that once she dropped it off, you said within a couple of months.
Additional that package, yes.
Okay. What was the original Sally Port video that you received? In other words, what were you following up on?
What you had previously described as a grainy black.
Okay, so just to be clear and close that loop, when did you receive that video, if you can tell us?
Which one? The grainy one?
The grainy one.
Earlier in the investigation.
A year ago, 2 years ago?
I don't recall.
Okay. Do you believe it was pretty early on in the investigation?
I don't recall.
Do you know what the mechanism was that you received that one? If Chief Rafferty is the one that gave over the clear video, how did you get the grainy video?
I don't know.
Was it you that received it, or do you believe that you commissioned Trooper Proctor to go get that video?
It would have been a task for Sergeant Bukhenik or Trooper Proctor or someone else from the unit.
So the reason you don't know is because you didn't personally do it.
Correct.
Yesterday, you testified that it is obviously your responsibility as not just the chief of the unit, but as the evidence officer to maintain and protect the integrity of the physical evidence that's found under your supervision, correct?
Yes.
You indicated that you took photographs of the items that were recovered on that initial search, and you took those photographs in place where they were found, correct?
Yes.
With the exception of one of the photos, you indicated that it had been moved by a shovel, and then you instructed the individual put it back down where it was found, and then that's the point at which you photographed it, correct?
Yes.
You took an establishing shot, then a closer shot, and then I think even a third close-up shot, correct?
Yes.
You indicated pretty clearly yesterday what the evidence that you found at the scene was a red plastic taillight piece that was recovered first, then 3 feet or so to the south of that, the shoe was recovered, and then 1 to 2 feet south of that, another red plastic piece, and then a clear plastic piece next to that, correct?
Yeah, you get the last two inverted. It's clear, then red, but
Version, it's becoming a theme. Sorry about that. So it was a clear piece,
I'm going to strike that comment.
and then a red piece next to the clear piece.
yes.
3 pieces of plastic in total and a shoe.
No, there was, with the clear piece, there was 2 pieces with it. So clear plastic, multiple pieces of the clear plastic.
Okay, so yesterday when we saw the photographs that you testified to, there was 1 piece of clear plastic that was photographed, right?
2.
Didn't the photograph have 1 sort of arc-shaped clear piece of plastic that you described as having did you say dimples or stippling?
Yes, I think I said dimples.
Okay. What was the second photo?
There's the next photo that was displayed was the second piece of clear plastic taillight.
So in fact, that would be 4 pieces of plastic.
Yes.
Okay. But yesterday you testified that you found 3 pieces of plastic, and in your report, you reported that you found 3 pieces of plastic, correct?
I didn't number the piece of plastic, if I recall my report correctly. I said we found clear plastic. As I displayed out of the bag, there was 2 pieces of clear plastic that we,
But there was only a photograph of 1,
no, there wasn't.
and your report says 3 total pieces of plastic, doesn't it?
No,
Let's take a look.
Do you have your report with you, Detective Lieutenant?
not that one, Your Honor.
Your Honor, is it possible that we can take our recess so I don't waste the jurors' time. I can use my time.
Sure.
All right, jurors, we'll take our morning recess.
Break about the search on January 29th, 2022. Obviously, it's important to be accurate in terms of the memorialization of things that are found of note during a search, correct?
Yes,
The way that you normally would memorialize something like that would be in a police report, correct?
that's one method,
You
yes.
might have handwritten notes
I
that
might.
would attend a search, correct?
Yes,
You might videotape part of it or all of it.
I could,
Then you could photo document it as well.
yes.
But ultimately, the circumstances surrounding how something was found or what was found at the time is best done in a memorialization in a police report, correct?
That is one method, yes.
As the official record of what was done at the time and who did it, correct?
Yes,
You did, in fact, draft a police report as it pertains to the search that was done by the CERT team on January 29th, 2022.
yes.
If you would take a look at the face page of that and tell me if that looks familiar to you.
It does.
Is that the report that you wrote documenting the search that was conducted that you've testified to in front of this jury?
Yes.
What's the date of that report?
February 10th, 2021, which was a typo, should be February 2022.
Okay, so February 10th, 2022 was the date that you memorialized the information about the search, correct?
Yes,
Obviously, that was much, much closer in time than today, correct?
yes,
Or yesterday, correct?
correct.
If you turn to paragraph 3, could you review that paragraph and tell me, after you review it, if that refreshes your recollection about exactly what you indicated was found by you and the CERT team on January 29th, 2022?
My recollection of what was located remains the same. I do see that the report states that it was a piece of clear plastic.
Okay. In fact, your report says that at approximately 17:40 hours, which is what time?
5:45 p.m.
The CERT team located, quote, a piece of red plastic, correct?
Yes,
And then it goes on to say it was consistent with brake light material from a motor vehicle, right?
yes,
If you look down a couple of other sentences, you talk about the,
yes,
if you look at the second to the last sentence, a few feet south from the sneaker, a piece of clear plastic consistent with clear lens of a motor vehicle is located, correct?
yeah, the quote is a second piece of red plastic. Yes,
Actually, the sentence before that, sentence just above that, starting with a few feet south.
yes,
It reads, a few feet south from the sneaker, a piece of clear plastic.
that's not what it says. Would you like me to read it?
Oh, I'm reading it. Sure, read it.
Okay. The sentence is several feet south of the clear plastic,
Lieutenant Tully.
Sorry.
Sentence above that, before that.
a few feet south of the sneaker, a piece of clear plastic consistent with clear lens of a motor vehicle was located.
Right. So in your lexicon, a piece means singular, does it not?
Yes,
If you meant pieces, you would have written pieces. You're educated, correct?
allegedly.
So clearly, from this report that was memorialized on February 10th, you indicated that a piece of clear plastic was located consistent with clear lens from a motor vehicle, right?
That's what it says.
Okay. Then it's not just what it says, it's what you wrote.
Correct.
Correct. Then the next sentence, which is the sentence you were about to read, go ahead and read that for me as well.
Several feet south of the clear plastic, a second piece of red plastic was located.
Okay. Simple math. According to your report on February 10th, a piece of red plastic was found first, then a piece of clear plastic was found, then a piece of red plastic was found thereafter, correct? According to that report.
Yes,
Then you go on in the following paragraph to reiterate, just to clear up any doubt about what was found, and the last sentence reads, the sneaker and 3 pieces of plastic were secured as evidence, correct?
Objection.
I don't know. What's the objection?
Form.
No, I'll allow it.
Is that what it says?
yes.
Okay. Then yesterday, you were asked to open these 2 evidence envelopes.
Should I take a look?
Oh, of course, yes. 570, 571. Those are the bags that you opened yesterday, correct?
Yes,
You indicated yesterday in front of the jury, you didn't indicate, you pulled out 2 pieces of clear plastic, did you not?
I did.
Okay. That was in bag, I want to say that was in bag 570. Why don't we do this? With the court's permission, can you please open Exhibit 570 in that bag and just look inside?
I didn't bring gloves with me, Your Honor.
I think there might be some on the stand
Oh,
there
thank you, Your
inside
Honor.
that.
Okay?
I don't remember which one it is, so if you could just open it and look inside and describe for us which items are inside that bag.
570, the description is pieces of red, hard plastic taillight cover contained inside this bag.
Look down in there and tell me, do you see that red plastic piece?
Yes,
Okay. Yesterday, you pulled out 2 pieces and indicated that was what was contained in the bag, correct?
correct.
Can you take another closer look?
As I take a closer look, there are 2 pieces and there is a very small fragment that remains in the bag.
Can you pull that fragment out as well? You go ahead and replace that. So in total, Lieutenant Tully, how many pieces of red plastic are in that evidence bag?
As we sit here today, there are 3.
Thank you. Go ahead and close that. If you wouldn't mind, the next bag is Exhibit 571, is that right?
Yes.
Could you please open that and let's go through the same process? Just look inside and tell us what you see.
Inside 571, there are 2 pieces of clear plastic.
2 bags are supposed to represent what was found by the CERT team on January 29th, 2022, correct?
Yes.
There's 5 pieces of plastic, 3 red, 2 clear, correct?
As we sit here today, yes.
My question, Lieutenant Tully, is where did the other pieces of plastic come from?
Be more specific? Which pieces?
Where did the extra 2 pieces of plastic come from in those bags?
Well, it appears to me that small fragment I pulled out may have potentially come from the larger piece. The
I
other,
think that, just to clear that up, you believe, as you sit here, that that smaller piece was broken off from one of the larger pieces?
again, I'm making a big assumption here at your request.
Okay?
Yeah, that's what it appears to me by looking in the bag.
By the way, Lieutenant, this isn't a trick question. I'm not asking you to assume anything. You were there, and you recovered the pieces. You described recovering 3 items of evidence, correct?
No,
Didn't you just read in your report, I'll read it again, last sentence, the sneaker and 3 pieces of plastic were secured as evidence?
that's
Wrote
4.
them.
That's 4.
Sorry, I said items of evidence. Items of plastic. Let's leave the sneaker out of our discussion for the time being.
Okay.
Okay. You were the one that conducted the search, correct?
The CERT team conducted the search. I was
You
present.
memorialized the search.
Yes,
You were there photographing the things that were covered in the search.
yes,
Ultimately, you were responsible for bagging those items up, correct?
yes,
There are 5 items in that bag, or in those 2 bags, right? Just the plastic.
correct.
Yet your report very clearly says there were 3 items of plastic evidence recovered at the scene.
Yes.
My question, once again, is where did the extra 2 items come from? The pieces of plastic.
Well, as memorialized on the bag, it says pieces of clear plastic. So I will take the hit that my report does not properly memorialize it. But I would argue that the handwritten notes on the bag that are contemporaneous to the collection of the evidence would be more accurate, as is in my memory of 2 clear plastic things being collected. As to the 3rd piece, again, I'm making an assumption, but it appears that is a small piece that was separated from the other 2 pieces.
You don't know that small piece separated from the other 2 by being broken off, do you?
No, I don't.
Just a guess on your part, right?
It's a guess. The bags were out of our custody at the crime lab for a period of time. They had done an analysis. We did an evidence review with you, yourself, and other defense counsel on December 1st of last year. We pulled all the evidence out. It was memorialized by your investigator, and it was put back in the bags.
But you didn't see our investigator snapping pieces off the plastic, right?
He did not.
Okay. Records that you testified to, specifically the Verizon call records that you testified about during your training, the 200 plus hours of training that you had, you've learned how to read Verizon records to determine cell towers that are used in your investigation, correct?
Yes.
You were also taught how to read Verizon call records to determine the sector or the side that a cell tower is pinging, for lack of a better word, called a cell face, correct?
Yes.
One of the documents that you rely on pretty heavily is ultimately it's a call record that gives you certain information provided by whoever the carrier is, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, whoever, right?
Yes.
Do you recognize the document that's in front of you or the portion of the call record that's in front of you?
It appears to be a portion from the call detail records we referenced earlier.
Okay. My questions about this are relatively simple. There is a sector number that provides information that describes the directionality, if you will, of the target phone number, which part of the cell tower that target phone number or that target device was facing, correct?
Yes.
In your maps, did you include any of the cell face data about which portion of the cell tower was pinging the phone that was being tracked?
No. Can I explain why I made that decision?
Please do.
When the trouble with depicting and making exhibits when relative to cell phone records is you don't want to make the map too complicated. So as I describe it to the jury, I want to make sure that the record is clear. I don't typically will use the sector as part of my maps. I would argue that it gives greater deference to the defendant because the phone could be anywhere within a 360-degree area of the antenna opposed to a narrower 120-degree area around that antenna. For the purposes of making a clear depiction, I typically will not use sector unless it's absolutely important to show that a handset was in a specific location.
So you did include the sector information on the maps that you provided, both to Mr. Lally and that you showed to the jurors and provided us, correct?
Yes, as relative to the CSLI ones, yes.
So in point of fact, according to the map at least, wherever that little triangle is, that red triangle that you used to denote the cell tower or the antenna, the responsive phone, the device, could be anywhere on a 360-degree azimuth from that antenna, correct?
Yes.
I want to ask you about the one map that was related to 5:20 a.m. to 5:37 a.m. You remember that?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. There were several maps shown. That's a copy of a page of an exhibit that's already been marked and entered into evidence. You recognize that?
Yes.
That's a copy of your map that you did dealing with ENBID 57021, correct?
Yes.
The time frame was 5:20 a.m. to 5:37 a.m. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. By the way, do you know what ENBID stands for?
No, that's why the legend key is helpful. Its node is the NB, but I'm unsure on the E.
Evolved Node B Identifier, right?
Is that a question? Yeah, that's possible, yes. Okay.
Refresh your recollection, that's what it means.
I'd have to look at the key again, but that sounds right.
So an evolved, if that's what it stands for, an evolved Node B identifier, and then a series of numbers after that, is simply sort of the proper name for a particular tower.
Correct.
No two towers have the same ENBID, correct?
Correct.
Okay. With regard to, and I'm just going to call it ID 5702, do you see what appears to be, on your map, what appears to be the cell tower that is associated with that ID number, 5702?
Yes.
Okay. There's one address that's noted on your map, correct? At 34 Fairview?
No, there's multiple.
Okay. What are the other addresses that you noted on your map?
1 Meadows Ave and Waterfall Bar and Grill.
Okay. If I could hand you another map, does that appear to be a Google map?
Yes.
Does that generally track the map that you created, the darker map that you created, meaning it's the same basic scale?
It is not the same scale.
How much different is that scale?
The one you handed me is a zoomed-in version of the map I created.
Okay. Do you recognize it as being a true and accurate reflection of a Google map that's just zoomed in a little bit on the same basic area?
As you just described, it appears to be Google Map creation.
You see two addresses that are on that Google map?
Yes.
What are those two addresses?
34 Fairview Road and 12 Country Lane.
As you look at that Google map with both of those, given your experience with both of those addresses, those
It does. I would note that you can't see the roads really on this map that you handed me.
understood. I'm not going to ask you a question
It's
about
kind of it's a white blur, so it.
Okay. But does it look like that's where 34 Fairview is? That's where 12 Country Lane?
Yeah.
Okay. Then I'm going to ask you for the third item that's denoted on the map. That is the cell tower 57021. Do you see that denoted on the map?
Yes.
Taking a look at that exhibit, would you agree that the cell tower 57021 is significantly closer to what's denoted as 12 Country Lane, the McCabe residence, physically as a crow flies, than it is to 34 Fairview?
I would not characterize it as significant.
How would you characterize it?
That it is closer.
Okay. What does that denote?
The cell tower that we previously mentioned, 57021.
Okay. Then there's a line as a straight line from that cell tower down to this location. What is that location?
It's denoted on this exhibit as 34 Fairview Road.
Okay. You see a legend indicating scale, how far that is.
I see numbers and miles written on there.
Does that appear to be reflective of given your understanding and your experience with this location or these locations, does that appear to be a relatively accurate delineation of the distance between the cell tower and that location, and that address?
I don't know the distance between the cell tower and the address off the top of my head.
Would you agree that it's around 2 miles.
It's roughly 2 miles.
Okay, then I'm going to ask you to take a look at the same proximity, cell tower on the top of the screen, and then the address at 12 Country Lane. Do you see those two items denoted on the map?
Yes.
And do you see the approximate distance between those two items?
See it on the map?
All right. Does it appear to you that the distance from 12 Country Lane looks like it's less than half the distance to 30?
I wouldn't characterize it as appears to be less than half.
How would you characterize it?
My understanding of that area, I would say it's at least a mile between those two locations as the crow flies.
Okay, meaning between the cell tower and 12 Country Lane,
Yeah,
right?
Yes.
It indicates approximately a mile, correct?
it does indicate that.
Okay. The other location indicates approximately 2.4 miles, right?
It does indicate that.
All right. So would you agree that a mile is less than half of 2.4 miles?
I would agree a mile is less than half than 2.4.
Thank you. You also noted that there are two cell towers much closer to 34 Fairview than the 57021, correct?
Yes,
As a matter of fact, you already noted for the jurors that, say, at 6 a.m. or 6:05 a.m. and thereafter, when it's clear that Ms. Reed was at 34 Fairview, she found the body of John O'Keefe, that her phone was relaying to those two towers variously, bouncing back and forth, correct?
yes,
I'm just going to give you that packet, Lieutenant. Like I said, it's not a memory test. That helps refresh your recollection of the name of the two towers closest to 34 Fairview. You have that in mind?
yes, sir.
Okay, so the two towers closest to 34 Fairview are 57171, correct?
Yes,
572, is that right?
yes,
Both of those towers picked up Miss Reed's signal at 12:33 a.m. and again after 6:03 a.m., correct?
you asked me about 1233, so if it's okay, I'm going to refer back in the exhibit.
Of course.
That is correct. It hit the 57171.
Then after 6 a.m., it was also picking up, bouncing, I think you said bouncing back and forth between 57171, 5728.
Yes,
Both of those towers were picking her up.
yes,
Importantly, though, between 5:20 and 5:37 a.m., neither of those two towers ever picked up her phone or any signal from her phone, correct?
correct.
Okay. So based on those facts, it's far more likely that Karen Reed was actually at Jennifer McCabe's and on her way to Jennifer McCabe's at and around 5 a.m. than going to 34, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
What does RTT stand for?
Depends on who you ask from Verizon, either range to tower or round trip time.
Have you ever heard real-time tool?
I have.
Okay, so that's the RTT has several acronyms, but real-time tool is one of them, correct?
Yes,
The RTT data is what you earlier described as a ranging data or access distance, correct?
I didn't use the term access distance. I know that Verizon may, but I said ranging.
So it's just in common vernacular, it's the distance from the antenna to where the signal is going, correct?
Yes,
All right. Could you please review that and tell me if you recognize what's depicted on that document?
I recognize it to be one of the entries from the RTT report for the account we're talking.
I'm sorry. It's around 5:18 in the morning, correct?
Yes,
Okay, you utilize this report or portions of this report, including this entry, to come up with your data, especially as it relates to ranging data, correct?
yes,
Do you see the column on that document called cross duration sex, right? Procedure duration sex.
I do.
What does that mean?
That is the amount of time in which this communication occurred.
Okay. Am I correct in understanding that the length of time for the RTT event is calculated in seconds, correct?
It is.
All right. Do you see the row in the exhibit that indicates the time 5:18 a.m.?
Yes,
Do you see a column that's labeled procedure start time?
yes,
And right next to it, there's a procedure end time, correct?
yes,
Are those the start times and the end times that you earlier testified to in front of the jury about the event in question at 5:18 a.m. or thereabouts, the start of the interaction or the communication with the device and the end of the communication with the device?
yes.
When you say communication with the device, what does that mean? What are you referring to?
It's-
A phone call, a text, something?
We don't know. As I testified to, the ranging reports will create entries even unbeknownst to the user. So I have no information with this record before me about what the user was or was not doing with the phone.
But your testimony is that those two arcs that we saw, those respective arcs that we saw, your testimony is that this RTT data, in your view, establishes that she was on the device, not she, but the device was on the first arc,
I'm going off the ranging that they give me.
and then you created those two arcs. I'm just trying to make sure I understand what the definition of those two arcs are in your map.
The definition comes from the first distance and last distance, which is denoted on this exhibit you have in front of me here.
Okay, the first distance is what?
0.82 miles.
Okay, the second distance is,
Correct.
all right, that's a difference of what?
1.5 miles.
0.15 miles, correct?
Excuse me, yes,
Okay. Do you see the procedural duration column indicated on that document?
I do.
Okay. The procedure duration column indicates 0, doesn't it?
Yes,
However, if we look very closely at the start time and the end time, they're not actually the same times, are they?
correct.
There's a difference in those two times. Can you tell the jurors what that difference is?
It is 4 thousandths of a second.
0.004 seconds, correct?
Yes,
You testified that you believe that the start and end distances for the RTT event in question indicate two different locations for that device. In other words, the start time, it was on the first arc, the end time, it was on the second arc. You don't know where on the arc, but somewhere on those two arcs.
using the ranging data, I created a map, and
understand.
that's what I did.
Okay, so the device would have moved from the first arc to the second arc, correct?
Yes,
Right. You're familiar with, obviously, the formula to determine speed using distance and time, correct?
yes.
All right. Can you calculate for us the speed that the device would have traveled to go from the first arc to the second arc over a distance of 0.15 miles in 4 thousandths of a second?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, let me see if I can help. So speed is calculated as distance divided by time, right?
Yes,
If you divide 0.15 miles by 4 thousandths of a second, you come up with 37 miles per second. Would you agree?
Objection.
Sustained.
Can you do the calculation in your head?
no, sir.
Do you need a calculator?
I would.
Your Honor, if
I'd like to see counsel at sidebar, please.
Senator Tully, do you happen to have your cell phone with you?
I thought you were going to ask the other question first with your numbers.
I can. Let me ask you, so you don't have to sit there with a cell phone in front of you, let me ask you if you would agree with this, that 0.15 divided by 0.004 is 37 point.
I'd have to write it out. I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
If you had a calculator in front of you, could you do it?
I could.
You don't have your cell phone with you.
I do not.
Court's permission, I've got mine right here, I can turn it on, or my co-counsel has one.
How about, can you use Madam Court Reporter's cell phone and do that? She's closest.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Court Reporter.
Thank you, Your Honor. If you could divide 0.15 by 0.004, let me know what you come up with.
37.5.
So that would be, given the fact that the distance, as indicated on that record, the distance is 0.1 miles over the course of 0.004 seconds, right?
No, I would push back as to when the distance was being created. That's the first distance and last distance.
Correct. What you indicated was the cell phone or the device was on the first arc and the start time, and on the second arc at the end time. All I'm asking is some basic math. You would agree that if calculation you just did is 0.15 miles divided by 4 thousandths of a second, that is 37.5 miles per second, to stay consistent, miles per second, correct?
I don't agree with the premise of the question. So
You don't have to agree with the premise of the question. I'm asking you about the math.
the math is correct, yes.
Math is correct, right? It's miles per second, correct?
Yes.
Based on that calculation. In order to get to miles per minute, you multiply it by 60, correct?
Yes.
You do that for me, please.
The question again, sir, I'm sorry?
Yes. Multiplying 37.5 times 60 would give us miles per minute. What is that number?
2,250.
If we wanted to go to miles per hour, which we're more familiar with, multiply it by 60 again, wouldn't you? What's that number?
1,035,000. Excuse me, sorry. 135,000.
135,000 miles per hour, correct?
Yes.
So you would agree, if the premise is moving from the first arc, moving 0.1 miles to the second arc over the course of 0.0 seconds, the device would have to be traveling 135 miles per hour, correct?
In your question, you said 1.5 miles travel. It's 0.15 miles. You corrected me. I'm going to throw it back at you, sir.
Fair enough.
All right.
0.15 miles, course of 0.04, the device would have to be traveling 135,000 miles per hour. It's basic math, correct?
While I agree with that, I would push back. That's probably not what the record is indicating.
You would agree that that is physically impossible, correct?
For a cell phone, yes.
Right. You would also agree that since that's impossible, you're not suggesting to this jury that the device moved from arc 1 to arc 2 in 4 thousandths of a second. That can't be what you're suggesting.
I'm not suggesting that.
Okay. In fact, what actually makes more sense is that the signal was moving to and from the device at light speed, 186,000 miles per second.
It does.
Radio waves move at what?
Speed of light.
Speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, right?
Yes.
Okay. If, as you indicated on direct examination, if that return signal, the bounce, is in any way refracted, it takes a deviation, and it's not straight because of something like, I don't know, weather, precipitation, or snow, then it would take longer to get back, correct?
That's fair.
That could be what's reflected in that map and the distance of the two arcs. Isn't that correct?
That's not my experience with these records.
But you do agree that, in fact, the device, as you indicated earlier, moved from arc 1 to arc 2, from the start time to the end time. That's impossible.
No, I'm saying that the records reflect that the first time the distance was marked and the second time the distance was marked, that's what's represented on the map.
Right, but you said that those are reflective of the start time and the end time, which is 0.004 of a second apart.
No, I don't know that's when these distances were created. It doesn't say start of procedure distance. It says first distance, last distance.
Actually, it says, start time, 18 and 19 seconds, 0.15, right?
Yes.
Procedure end time, 5:18, 19 seconds, 0.15, right?
Yes.
That's the difference, and that's the 0.004 of a second difference, correct?
Yes.
On direct examination, you said the start time and the end time are how you calculated the two different arcs,
No.
correct?
No.
Are you changing your testimony?
No. The map says first and last, as reflected in the record, first distance and last distance. So one could hold the map and this record next to each other and figure out how I determined those locations depicted on the map. It doesn't say start and end time. It says first and last.
Right. You said that it was the beginning of the communication and the end of the communication, both reflected on that document. The
Yes.
start time and the end time. I understand what you're saying about the distance, 0.15. Nobody's arguing about that. You said on direct examination that the distance was a difference between what time the first arc occurred and what time the second arc occurred. There was a distance between it. Your testimony was the device moved from the first arc to the second arc.
I'm saying the device moved from the first arc to the second arc, yes.
It would be impossible to do that in 0.004 of a second, correct?
A cell phone, yes.
You did one last issue, and I'm gonna deviate from the cell tower stuff. You got information during the course of your investigation that an eyewitness placed a Ford Edge in front of 34 Fairview in the early morning hours of January 29, 2022, correct?
I'm familiar with that.
The eyewitness indicated that the Ford Edge was placed there sometime between 2:30 in the morning and 3:30 in the morning, correct?
I'm familiar with that.
All right. As the supervising investigator, did you do anything to investigate the circumstances of that Ford Edge being placed in front of 34 Fairview sometime between 2:30 and 3:30 in the morning?
Yes.
What did you do?
We determined the veracity of that statement, and we want to make sure that the person who gave it is consistent and accurate and had a good vantage point of it. I have concerns about...
By the way,
Oh,
were you satisfied with that?
no.
Why not?
The person has given the statement multiple times, and it appears to have changed over those times. It also appears that the person observed this vehicle from a distance, and also the identification of a Ford Edge seemed highly suggestive the way that I had read the account of it. If I had done that as a police officer, this court would throw out that identification.
Did you find out anybody in the Albert family, for instance, on the Ford Edge?
I don't recall off the top of my head if somebody, I did not know.
Did you task anybody else to look at automobile registration records?
I believe Trooper Proctor and Sergeant Bukhenik had investigated that. I don't know as I sit here.
They did own a Ford Edge, didn't they?
Objection.
So the objection sustained.
The circumstances of that Ford Edge being seen and placed in front of 34 Fairview, right where the body was found, between 2:30 and 3:30 in the morning, right? So you just decided, and that investigation, quotes, is, I didn't believe him, right?
No.
That last line of questioning, as far as the witness in the Ford Edge, you mentioned that there were several different stories, correct?
Yes.
Several different versions of the statement.
Yes.
What were those different versions?
The first was that this person saw a Ford Edge in front of 34 Fairview. The next one that I can recall is that the person stated that They were not on Fairview, but on Cedar Crest, some distance away, looking at this vehicle in a blizzard. Person also self-reported that he was colorblind, and he was operating a larger motor vehicle. The third story was a concern about the time. The third story was, as he arrived, the Canton police had the street blocked off at about 4 a.m. He places this Ford Edge outside the residence at a time before that. So we know through our investigation that the Canton police didn't arrive till shortly after 6 a.m., so the witnesses' times are off as well.
As far as the term as a highly suggestive ID with the Ford Edge, can you explain what you mean by that?
As I read the report, the investigator had asked the person, first a question, they stated that there was a vehicle in front of 34 Fairview Road. The witness was then brought outside, and the investigator allegedly pointed to a motor vehicle that was in a parking lot, and it said, "Is that it?" The witness said, "Yes, that's it." So it's suggestive in the fact that it would be a single photo identification, which, you know, as a police officer, I would not give somebody one thing and be suggestive, "Is this it?" Because as the courts have ruled, that's highly suggestive, and the person's more likely to adopt that description of whatever they're describing, opposed to if you use other methods.
When you were being asked on cross-examination about certain distances from the house at 34 Fair to the area where you had recovered items, repeatedly you had been asked about a distance of 30 feet, correct?
I did.
From the items that were recovered and the area that was described to you as where Mr. O'Keefe's body was located shortly after 6 a.m., is that 30 feet from the house?
No, where the items were a little further on the edge of the property, so it'd be closer to 40 or 50 feet.
As far as where Mr. O'Keefe was located with reference to the curb or with reference to the street, how close was that?
From the curb, reports was about 10 feet from the curb.
So the evidence was a lot closer to the roadway, a lot closer to the curb than it was to the house, correct? What did you find significant between the location of the evidence and Mr. O'Keefe in relation to the roadway versus in relation to the house?
The pieces of evidence were physically on the roadway, on the pavement, or the curb.
Just one question as it to the Sally Port video from the Canton Police Department. Are you aware of how those videos were recorded as far as when they stopped, when they started?
Not off the top of my head, no. But the ones we have in possession, no.
Are you familiar at all with the camera system at the Canton Police Station?
Vaguely, yes.
Do you know whether or not it's motion activated?
The Canton IT director stated that it was.
The objection is sustained.
Let me ask it with, are you aware that the cameras are motion activated?
Objection.
As to form, it's,
What, if anything, are you aware as to how the cameras report?
Objection.
I'm going to allow it.
Move approach.
Okay?
When it came to the Sally Port video, at some point you did review them to some extent.
Yes.
Over the course of your review, what did you note in reference to time? Was it one long consistent or did it jump?
It jumped.
Based on that, what conclusions did you draw as to how that video recorded?
It appeared to be motion activated. As these jumps occurred, it appeared to be triggered by motion.
With reference to the items that were recovered on January 29th during the search team search that you were present for, in addition to your police report, how were they memorialized?
On the exterior of the paper bags that they were contained in.
When was that done? Before or after February 10th when your report was written?
Objection.
Ask it differently, Mr. Mully.
When was the memorialization on the evidence bags done in relation to when you wrote the report?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
The difference would be the notes on the outside of the bag happened at the time of collection, and then I wrote my report 11 days later.
As far as your memory, as you sit here and testify today and yesterday, as far as the items that you took out of the bag, are those the same items that were recovered by the search team on January 29th?
Yes.
The information from the call detail records that Mr. Jackson presented to you, there was essentially two little columns, correct?
2 rows, yes.
Was that sort of the entirety of what you reviewed as far as the call detail records in relation to generating the slides that would fit to the jury?
No.
Showing you now what's been marked as Exhibit 5 with reference to what Mr. Jackson earlier. Lieutenant, from what's depicted on there, what issue do you have with the depiction on that exhibit?
Like I mentioned, it's difficult to get a good sense of what we're looking at because the roads don't really appear on here. If they do, they're light and faint. There are the large black line kind of intersects with a lot of them, with the words of them. At the bottom, it looks like it's written map scale next to a scale, but I can't attest to the veracity of that. Those would be a couple problems I see.
With reference to the slides that you created with the different time frames, the location of the handset or the cell phone of the defendants that you observed from the call detail records? Were they consistent with other pieces of evidence that you had, whether it be video and or witness statements?
Yes.
That would be consistent with the location of the defendant, correct?
Yes.
Questions about speed and distance traveled. And you indicated that you did not agree with the premise of Mr. Jackson's question, correct?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury what it was that you did not agree?
While I agree it would be impossible for the phone to travel at that distance, I disagree with the premise that the procedure that was being captured here and the distances may not be at the same time. So there may be a distance could have preceded the procedure. The end distance could have been after the procedure. There are other ways to capture that information. Again, all I'm doing, and I'm at the mercy of the records, is illustrating them. I then take the next step in order to corroborate that information, ideally through video and other location-based information.
In relation to speed, is that something that you've done in other cases with call detail records?
Yes.
You mentioned that you weren't able to do it here or didn't do it here. Can you explain why not?
By speed, do you mean route of travel, or if I have a more robust set of records? So again, we're at the mercy of Verizon here. We only got a limited number of records from the ranging data. With other cases, if the phone is much more chatty with the antenna, if there's more lines of communication, I've seen lines of communication as frequent as every couple of seconds or less than a couple seconds. As I map those out, I can make more of a determination of maybe the route of travel of the cell phone. So as I put the first arc, I'll then place the second arc on a map and say to myself, how could a handset get from the first arc to the second arc? I'll have a number of possibilities. I will then lay out the third arc. Okay, how could a phone get from the second arc to the third arc, and repeat that process, narrowing down the different possibilities. And oftentimes I'm able to determine the route of travel, send investigators down to that route, and we find corroborating information.
Again, why was it that you weren't able to do that with this information that you received from Verizon in this case?
We received a limited number of entries on this record.
What relationship does that have to the area or the geographic location as far as the town of Canton is concerned and the number of antennas they have?
As respective to the number of records, it's a larger area the cell phone could potentially be.
So in no way in your testimony, in your slides, or anything else, are you suggesting that the device or the handset or the defendant's cell phone was traveling at that speed, correct?
Correct.
So could you explain to the jury again exactly what those arcs mean and what you are explaining?
Those records have a start distance and an end distance. I take those distances, place them on a map, starting where the antenna that is also in that record states it is, draw a distance from that antenna, draw an arc at that distance with the radius being the distance that's on the record, and have an arc that's in excess of 120 degrees.
I've also asked some questions about weather causing some interference or something in relation to the recording with regard to antennas or which antenna a device might connect to. You indicated that was not your experience with these types of records. Can you expound upon that?
The greatest predictor of what antenna a cell phone is going to use is distance, because like I said, the farther the handset is away from antenna, the more degraded the signal is going to get. So that's the best predictor. But like I mentioned earlier, there are things that can disrupt a cell phone signal, which would cause a handset not to connect to the closest antenna. That can be physical obstruction, precipitation, elevation, an antenna goes down for whatever period or for whatever reason, causing it to connect to another antenna that is technically further away.
So from your review of the call detail records and from those various time frames contained within the slides or presented to the jury, what can you say from that material in reference to the other evidence collected as to the location of the defendant's cell phone during those relevant time periods?
Relevant, I'll zero in at 518. I would suggest that the defendant, her vehicle, and the cell phone were on Washington Street outside of Temple Beth Abraham at that time. That's one thing that I would be comfortable suggesting.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Lieutenant Tully, when you created the arcs on your map, you also put on the map 5:18 a.m., correct?
Yes,
Where'd you get that number?
from the procedure start and end time.
So you did use the procedure start time and end time, correct?
To denote the time, but not, yeah, to denote the time on the slide, yes.
Time of the event, correct?
Yes,
All right, so the 18 and 19 seconds, and then, I don't have it in front of me, but 0.4, I think, is that right?
yes,
That was the time that you used to establish that the device was on the first arc, correct?
no, I didn't use it to establish the arc. I used the distance to establish the arc, and I placed the time on the slide,
Time,
5:18.
the time that Verizon gave you as the start time, correct?
Yes, they're both 5:18.
So there's a start time and a start distance from the tower. In other words, the event took place at this distance at this time starting, correct?
No, you're using the wrong words. It says first distance.
I'm not using the wrong words.
Yes, sir. You said start distance. It's first distance.
Okay, fine. Okay, pick the words. First distance. Start time and first distance, correct?
Yes,
Then
those are on the record.
Right. Then Verizon gives you an end time, correct?
Yes,
And last distance, correct? Yes. You created your arc based on the start time and first distance versus the end time and last distance, correct?
no. The time weren't associated.
You're saying no is because that would require the device to travel at 135,000 miles an hour.
Objection. If the witness could please answer the question.
So let him finish,
Okay, sure.
and then the objection to that is sustained. You can ask it differently.
Go ahead.
The times were not part of the depiction of the range. I will suggest to you that it is probably unbelievable that those are actually start and end times. What I'm saying is we don't know for certainty that is the exact time, the first distance and the last distance. I'd have to look back at the records, but I also say that we have corroborating evidence that is accurate.
You'd have to look back at the records, correct?
Yes.
That is your record.
No,
That's-
the record's key.
Where's the records key?
They were provided by Verizon.
Where are they, sir?
I don't have them in front of me.
Right.
Okay.